Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this marvelous location. This will be not exactly a fireside chat. I need the microphone just to get to the other side. But this is meant to be interactive, and I've seen that some questions came up that weren't asked. So as we discuss, if any, I will try and multitask. I will try to listen, but also look to the audience. If you have a question, anytime, just put your hand up, and I'll try and get the question and introduce it.
And we can also show to the screen if needed, if somebody has an online question, so you can just ask.
We will try that, but that means I have to do three things. I'm not sure I can do that. But since the 1990s, as we've heard, many billions of euros of PPPs have been done throughout the world. So you think now it would be fairly straightforward, people would know how to do it. But dare I say, in the Baltics, it hasn't always been a success. I understand that even a project that failed to reach financial close not so long ago. But one of the critical issues is the sustainable success of the project. And why do I say sustainable? I don't mean the project actually working. I mean that it is regarded as appropriate from both the public side and the private side, that there is appropriate risk transfer and there is appropriate returns. If the private sector are viewed as making excessive returns, then the public sector, and more importantly, public opinion, the man in the pub or the woman in the pub that Matthias referred to earlier, will turn against it. That won't be sustainable. So the key, I think, is the appropriate balance of risk transfer between the public and private sector, and hence the snappily titled purpose of this talk is preparing and structuring bankable PPP projects. So on this panel, we're fortunate to have, I've written here, a distinguished group of experts from both the public and private sector, ranging from the beginning of the project lifestyle, which Martins we've heard just now, to the end, to the bankers at the end. So what I will do is I will briefly ask each member to introduce themselves and their role, and then I will try to moderate this discussion along the project life cycle, if you like, from the public sector at the beginning, again, sorry, bankers at the end, again. But again, please, if you have questions, doesn't have to go with the flow, just interrupt, and I will try. So me first, my name is Tony Marsh. I've been involved with infrastructure finance for over 30 years, starting with energy, both with private sector banks and with public sector banks. The EBRD, the UK government asked me to set up the Green Investment Bank. I was involved with that. And now I'm involved as an independent member of the Investment Committee for BaltCap, but I'm an independent member of the Investment Committee for Aviva European Infrastructure, which is debt and unlevered equity. And I'm involved in an African infrastructure fund, amongst others. So that's me. So if we go from left to right, have the introductions.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Giedrius Ruškys. I work at European Investment Bank at the moment. I am there for about 4 years. Before that, I worked at Nordic Investment Bank in Helsinki. So in total, in project finance and PPP area, I'm somewhere since 2008, so more than 10 years, and have been participating in structuring and also advising public authorities and signing the PPP transactions in Nordics, also Poland, Russia. So these areas, and of course we try to do something in Baltic countries as well. We will see how it will be successful. And so that's about me shortly.
Hello, my name is Kadri Matteus. I'm a specialist counsel and a sworn attorney from Cobalt, Estonia. So my part would be the legal part of PPP, the public procurement, which is the issue where I specialize in. So public procurement is one method of, well, actually the method of doing PPP. So this is the phase of the project that needs a legal partner, either from the state, the municipality, or in a later phase, the bidder who wants to participate in the PPP project. There are also lots of other administrative issues, which I believe come up in PPP issues, which I usually deal in. And our office advised the PPP project for the Tallinn school project, which was a quite long time ago. But why we're talking here in Tallinn about the PPP projects is we haven't actually had a good PPP project for a long time. So maybe we hope now we have very good incentive here to make a good, good PPP project, and we can have all these aspects that we hear from here to take into account and to help from the legal side. Thank you.
Martin Sadowskis already, I believe, made the presentation, so we can save a time on me.
Okay, good morning. I'm Linas Itsikevičius. I am working as a finance and cost-benefit analysis specialist at the Central Project Management Agency, which is a public institution reporting to the Ministry of Finance in Lithuania. And mainly I'm responsible for the development of all methodological environment of investment project preparation and evaluation, including the PPPs. We also preparing public standard documents, financial documents, and we also helping commissions which procure PPPs.
Yes, hi all. My name is Gediminas Miškinis. I'm from SEB Lithuania, responsible for the project finance cases here. As this is international audience, and maybe not all of them are familiar, not all of you are familiar with SEB, so we are one of the leading commercial banks in this region, with our headquarters in Stockholm and with our home markets in Scandinavia, UK, Germany, and the Baltics. Our structured finance unit has a lot of experience in financing PPPs in Western Europe countries. And when first PPP projects came in Lithuania, so we were happy to transfer that knowledge how to finance these projects in Lithuania as well. So we are proud to say that a number of PPP projects in Lithuania have been financed by SEB, mentioning PPP Palanga bypass project, Vilnius police station, Santariškės medical campus parking project, and we are looking at the other PPP projects as well. As infrastructure and energy utilities is one of the sectors where we want to grow and where we see this as a good way to increase our portfolio.
Okay, thank you everybody. I've just seen on the screen there questions are coming up. I may have to stand to read them, so at least the app works, so I can move to that. So feel free to do that if you don't want to raise your hand. Now, if we go through the project lifestyle, we'll start with the public sector on the planning stage. And to give Martin the rest, he's just had plenty to chat, we'll start with Linas first. So maybe, Linas, if we start, with all this worldwide experience of PPPs, which we've heard, how do you develop the human and technical capacity within state entities to help them maximize the chances of success? Because it's complicated and there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's complicated, but I think what we need to understand that a good PPP project is good project itself. And I think most of success of this PPP project really depends on the homework of the public sector. They have to prepare, good public procurement conditions which would encourage right incentives from the private entity to provide the public services we need. So it's very important to build the capacity of the public sector in preparing good public procurement conditions and documents. But as we understood from the previous presentation, that PPP it's not so easy. It can be very complex and usually require a lot of specific skills and knowledge to prepare correctly and properly. Wherefore, besides any trainings which are very important for the public offices, I want to mention one very important aspect. With any standard documents like templates, spreadsheets, and many other similar things which could facilitate this preparation work are very important in order to enable public officers who we know we cannot be experts in all the things, we need to have these tools in order to understand whether the ideas are rational, they are efficient, they are affordable, they are rational to be implemented as the PPP, and finally, is this like PPP project could be, attractive in the market from the investor's point of view, from the finance's point of view. And this requires a lot of knowledge and skills to do that. Therefore, these tools are very important, which enable them to understand this without making complicated calculations, without doing scientific research, and many other things. And this is really what really saves time, saves requirement for the specific knowledge. And what we are doing in the public sector regarding this issue, that I think we, more than 7 and 8 years, we are preparing this kind of standard documents and templates. And at the beginning, many was very skeptic. Let's say, we said, every PPP project is quite neat. How you could create a standards template, for example, for the private financial model? They said maybe it's impossible. But what we observed, it really works in practice. We have less mistakes in the models. We have really better communication in the public sector. We have better understanding of the public officers, what we do, what we want to reach, what the output could be of every project. And, before 6 and 7 years, I think we could not find any, similar systemic, work in other countries which could create something the same. But what we observe now, what the tendencies are now, that in many countries there are a lot of standard documents and spreadsheets are created in order to facilitate the work of public officers, to prepare this PPP project, to create a public sector corporation model, for evaluation, for value for money, etc. And now what we could say that in Lithuania we already have 6 or 7 years of a practical experience in doing so. And we think that it really works in practice and it's very useful, for the PPPs.
So Martins, you've linked to that, you've described how long it took to develop the PPP project. But in that development period, when did you consider the risk transfer to the private sector? What risks should be transferred and how? You talked about Eurostat. Was it literally based on getting it off balance sheet, or did you think more deeply about that? And then to both of you with that question, when Martins has spoken, Linas, how are you thinking about it, and how difficult is it to, forgive me, politicians, but to explain to the politicians as to what risk transfer should be in the pricing, etc.?
Thank you. And actually, I wanted to add what my colleague told about the help of central units to public sector institutions different. This is actually really crucial, especially for small amount projects. Since we have started our project, I was approached by several municipalities and state institutions asking how and what we have to do and so on and so on. And in many cases, these are small hospitals or kindergartens or such type of investments, and of course for such a small amount of investments, relatively small amount of investments, such a pre-described conditions would be essential. If we are speaking about risk distribution, then initially, as I mentioned in my presentation, initial idea was to share risks, as we thought that from the perspective of getting the best possible price, the best would be to share risks. And this is what actually, during my first meeting in EIB, when we discussed everything, they asked me, Martins, why are you going to go for off-balance sheet? At the end of the day, someone, and in this case, taxpayers, will pay for these risks. But from the perspective of government, it was quite clear that even if it is PPP option, if it's on-balance project, it has to be taken into bookkeeping accounts of the country when the investments are made. So for our project, if roughly we are speaking that CapEx is 100 million euros, divided into 2 years, 50 million per year. So if the total available fundings for all needs of government is, for example, this year, just 190 million, we can't imagine how we can give 50 million euros, so more than fourth of all available fundings to one particular project instead of, and in this case, these needs, these infrastructural needs, are always fighting with salaries for teachers and doctors and all the rest. From politician point of view, sometimes short-term gains. And that's why decision was made that we are going to off-balance sheet project. And when it should be off-balance sheet project, then according to Eurostat guidelines, it's quite clear. It's quite clear what we can do and what we can't do. That's why we made a contract, and we already locked several parts of contract for negotiations, as these parts of the contract during negotiations, they can change the balance on off or on balance sheet.
But that was done purely the minimum required for Eurostat. It wasn't a sort of a deeper, meaningful thought process to who is best placed to take which risk and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we went through preparing a contract, preparing a payment mechanism. We went through every particular risk. And some of them are taken by us. For example, land acquisition risk, archaeological risks. These are risks still belonging to government. They are shared risks still.
Okay, and Linas.
Yeah, I think that to talk to the politician, it's very important to come with the numbers as early as possible in order to explain what is the situation. Is it affordable? Is not affordable? Could we have rational demand, long-term demand, and etc. And then we could talk about risk allocation. And usually, we are preference, and actually, the only way to implement the project is to make it off balance. And regarding this aspect, what we have usually, that we as a public competence center, we are developing standard documents, and more or less we already have a standard risk allocation model, which more or less allow to understand even in the beginning of the preparation of the investment project, which risk has to be assumed by which party, And I think this is the way how we work with the politicians and how we communicate each of the PPP project to our audience, to our clients, to our public authorities.
Okay. So moving along the project lifestyle, we come to you, Kadri, in terms of, so they think they want to do a project, they've thought about risk allocation. Now, what about the enabling legislation? How important is that? And if it's done wrong, how easy is it to change?
Well, of course, enabling legislation is very important. But I think that EU law dictates a lot in this matter. If the typical PPP scheme is to find a contractual partner, there's a contractual relationship between the state or the municipality and the private sector. So there is some kind of a public procurement that has to be conducted in order to find this partner. Is it either a way of a concession or a competitive dialogue that was made in the Kekava project that is up to the contracting authority, to decide what is the right procedure? And I think we have all the legislative measures in force already, so there are no obstacles in that terms to make PPPs. And there has been talk in Estonia that should we change the law, adopt something, make some new regulations to enable PPPs, then I think no, because the EU rules are quite strict. We have quite little room to regulate something differently or additionally than the EU rules dictate. And that's the same in Latvia and Lithuania. We have our public procurement laws and we have to abide by them. And I think in essence, there is nothing wrong with them that we couldn't do a good PPP project. The other aspect to do a PPP project is actually, that we haven't discussed, is the institutionalized PPP project, which isn't that popular. It means that instead of forming contractual relationships of this partnership, the state can also form partnerships in joint ventures, that the joint venture is actually doing the project. So this is a bit gray area. It's only regulated with the EU basic principles of transparency. How do you find this partner to establish a joint venture with? That is something that could be regulated in more detail. But the most typical way, of course, the public procurement. I think the legislation is enabling at this point, and there are no obstacles in doing it. But I think what is actually even more important than the enabling legislation is actually the structure and the rules of the procurement that the contracting authority actually puts in force. It's very important, the market research in these PPP projects, as was already discussed, to ask actually the private sector what they can offer, what they are able to offer, so that the contracting authorities wouldn't have let's say, unreasonable expectations. Because I think this is the turning point of a PPP project. If the procurement is announced by the contracting authority, and actually the private sector will not come along with it, because the risks are too high for the private sector, the demands are unrealistic, maybe the dates are unrealistic, and of course the fear of negotiations. This is I don't know if it's the same in Latvia or Lithuania, but in Estonia, all contracting authorities fear negotiations like fire. Because, and I think the only procedure you can choose for a PPP project is a one with negotiations. It is not possible to arrange an open procedure, which is take it or leave it, for a PPP. It's a 30-year commitment between the two parties. There has to be some kind of competition, there has to be some kind of negotiations, and also the banks have to come with it. Because, as we saw, the PPP project takes a very long time for actually to be published. It takes years of preparation from the state side, then it goes public. We have a selection phase, we select our partners. This even takes a year or two, as we can see. And at the end stage, the bankers say, no, we will not do this project. And the whole project fails and is behind the deadline for years. So it's essential that the contracting authority consults with all the players in the market, the builders, the financiers, the one who will maintain it for 20 to 30 years, and also the bankers, that what are the conditions that the bankers will come along with this project. And I see this as the biggest threat, that it is not made correctly and some issue will be put up in a later stage of the procedure where there is no other possibility than to cancel the whole procedure. And this is the biggest risk. So I think it's very good to have very proper research before the PPP. Before every public procurement, of course, it's very important to have proper research, but in PPPs it's essential because it's such a long process. and also the financing rules and the payment rules. Because in Estonia, and I think also in other countries, the main problem is that private sector will earn too much with the 30 years. So maybe the contract terms would have to be, worked out in a way that somehow brings justice to the way it is financed, maybe some kind of terms, how to change a contract during the 30 years. Because the law also changes, whether does it allow to change the contract afterwards if we have some kind of practical issues. Right now we have some regulation that now allows to change a public procurement. Just a couple of years ago, we didn't have regulation that allowed to change this contract, but it's impossible to think that during these 30 years you wouldn't have any necessity to change the contract. So real life struggled because of it. So the law wasn't enabling to change. Now the law enables, but the contract itself, I guess, also needs to have very, proper regulation how to change a contract in the 30 years. And of course, all the general public procurement issues, that the selection criteria are fair and so on. The competition isn't too small and so on. But I guess, if there is good work done before the competition, the negotiations are allowed, and the principle of fair treatment is safeguarded during these negotiations, then I think it is possible to actually come out as a winner on both sides of the procedure.
So thank you. So I am now multitasking. So somebody has asked a question which is linked to this, and it's a bit of a hospital pass for you, Martins, but you can probably see the question as well as I. Martin, someone's asked, and it's linked to this, what is the possible risk of litigation in the Kekava project? And would that delay or postpone anything? So I think that's linked to what Kadri has been saying about the proper processes and the like.
If I understand correctly the question, then in what cases we will stop the project?
Yes. Is there possible litigation? Is there litigation risk? I presume they're thinking of the losing bidder or something.
In such a project, there are several risks, and every morning I'm waking up, I'm finding new possible risks. Okay, there is an evident possibility that maybe financiers will not give a loan to the winning bidder, but to minimize these risks, we are strongly working together with financiers, and I can assure you that we are having a close cooperation on it. Then, of course, there is a risk that if the final price offered by bidders is higher, and most probably it will be higher than envisaged back in 2015 made financial economical calculations, then at the end of the day it will be political decision whether we are accepting this from budgetary perspective or not. Yes, these are the mains, I believe.
Okay, thank you. So I've already been proven wrong, or not, I haven't been proven wrong. Before I came on this panel, I was advised that in Baltic infrastructure conferences, nobody ever asked any questions. We've had at least 3, so you've already beaten that. So now let's move to financiers. So a controversial question to EIB. Matthias covered this a bit early on, but your loan loss record in PPPs is presumably very low. I'd be interested to hear what that is. Does that mean that the private sector and lenders are not taking enough risk, or does it mean the risk-reward balance is satisfactory?
Yes, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we have some losses.
Okay.
So I came from NAB, So I'm sure that we do not have any losses from PPPs because we have only 6 projects maybe in portfolio in all the Nordic countries. But we have over around 200 probably PPP projects with like total outstanding loan amount signed around 25 billion euros. So during the whole life of the projects, of course, you try to avoid losses because we are like AAA rated institutions, so we are conservative, and we need to make sure that projects are structured properly. But still, there are different risks, which I maybe comment later on, which sometimes materializes. And those tend to, the most risky period is during construction phase. So we have, I think, 4 around projects in the whole life where we lost our money, not all, but some. Like Eurotunnel probably is one of the examples which is used in all textbooks. If you go to project finance course introductory, we always show Eurotunnel, how ambitious projects was and what went wrong there. Then I think we had some losses in one of London's underground metros, PPP. And then, of course, with the bankruptcy of Carillion Construction Company in UK, of course, we had financed many projects where Carillion was involved, and those which are during construction phase, not finished. There were some problems, and most likely we are losing some money there as well. And but these, out of 200 or more finance transactions, there are 4 or around this number. So there is, we do have some losses in PPPs. But despite that, we try to structure those like to be as bankable as possible, or the structure needs to be conservative and not unbankable. And when we talk about this, you need to understand that we are not lending money to, if you talk about PPPs, not to big corporate which has like a rating or something, or not to the public sector. We lend the money to the non-recourse structure, which basically is based on the cash flows. And you don't have any other security around, so you need to make sure that it works. So first of all, it's contract itself and the risk allocation, how you allocate the risk. And of course, all these like termination clauses, compensation events, we need to follow the logic, what banks used to see in other markets, etc. But it's also important what is around this PPP contract. For instance, procurement authority. Like we sometimes have cases when, like small municipality, like with annual budget of, just let's say it's example, like 500 million euros, wants to procure a PPP of 1 billion euro project. So of course, if you do the mathematics, it doesn't work. Like then it's not bankable project like this. Or municipal company says, oh, I will procure PPP, but basically they do not. What happens if there is termination? Then who pays the money? So if you don't have access to the public sector, then you ask for guarantees, but then but it's like on balance sheet, we don't want to guarantee. So it's good, for instance, in Latvian case, that is Ministry of Finance stand behind. But it's not always the case. When you deal with many projects, and especially in Eastern Europe, the governments try to be a bit more creative than in Western Europe countries, so they try to come up with strange ideas, which doesn't work. And then on the other side, you need to have good partners to implement the project. So one of the key risks is construction period, and then you need to have good and reliable construction contractors to implement that project. And that is very important for public procurement authorities when they make the projects, what kind of qualification criteria you set up. So you don't want to end with a 200 million project and construction company with turnover of 50 million winning the contract, because then it doesn't work like this, because the company does not have capacity, they haven't done PPPs, so they don't know even how to structure a project. And an operation as well, but that was less risky. So if you combine everything and if you try to structure correctly, so yes, it's acceptable risk. I wouldn't say it's low, because if you in our bank during construction, we do not consider PPPs, even well structured, to be investment grade projects. They're sub-investment grade. During operations, when become, but there are projects. Some projects are rated. They could be also investment grade during construction, but in their very low category. So if you look from that perspective, so of course they have the risk, and it's not like a rated credit risk.
And the point you make about Carillion, I think, is a good one. People forget that if that had been procured from the government would have lost money in those circumstances. And now with Carillion, it's the private sector. The government hasn't yet. They haven't had to take over the buildings. They haven't had to pay any money yet, and that is often lost. So now we'll come on to Gediminas. You've been very patient. I have two questions of you. One has been asked by a member of the audience, but I'll try and make it more polite, I think. So first of all, long-term assets require long-term liabilities. So how can a private sector bank, how do you cope with 20-year lending, for example, as an example on a PPP project? And then somebody has asked a question, and it says, how on earth do you compete with IFIs in a low interest rate risk environment? I prefer to maybe phrase it, what advantages do you feel that a local bank has compared to, say, the IFIs on infrastructure projects?
Yeah, good. So indeed, 20 years tenors are challenging for commercial banks, especially when you consider that the usual long-term tenors for, let's say, our commercial clients are 5-7 years maximum. So this is indeed an exception where we are sometimes able to make as long as the amount of these long-term 15, 20 years tenor exposure is not exceeding certain limit where our treasury calculates. As, of course, we apparently do not have deposit base for 20 years tenors, or we do not issue the bonds for the 20 years tenors. But our treasury is able to have certain amount of funds allocated for the long term and guarantee the fixed margin for the whole period of time. So that's the advantage of being the home bank here in the Baltic states and for providing these type of services. On the other hand, taking this funding question out, the other important question is regarding credit risk and credit worthiness of the project. First of all, the construction company and its ability, or the sponsor's ability to construct that certain project should be acceptable to the bank. And when the assets are being up and running, so then the question regarding creditworthiness of the public partner, if it's the state or state institution, or is it some kind of small municipality where we also need to address that risk if they would be able to meet their obligations in a 20-25 years period of time. So that is challenging. On top of that, of course, there is a question regarding belief in the legal framework as such. It's quite difficult to convince convince ourselves that this legal framework and the obligations by the public partner would be met and would be valid during the 20 years, and the state would not decide somehow to change somehow the law in order to cancel these commitments, as there were a few examples with where the state said that we do not want to do some kind of, in other areas, for example, the feed-in tariff, we do not want to take these risks, honor these obligations, and so on. So this also gives, we should bear that in mind. On the competition with the IFIs, so of course we as a commercial banks, we would never compete in terms of pricing, as we are not able to even ourselves, we are not able to lend that money as cheap as sometimes IFIs are able to lend to the private partners. But what advantages we have is that we know the local business, we know the local construction companies, we know how to take these risks, and if we are ready to take these risks, and the sponsors, if they are local players, so we also, due to relationship we believe in these cases. On the structure side, I think we are quite competitive together with the institutional banks, as we are ready to provide these 15, 20 plus years tenors for these type of projects, and also apply the same covenants that the EIB or other institutional banks do have. We also have some considerations that we see that EIB sometimes is more aggressive than we would like to be, but when we talk to EIB, they say we are more conservative than you guys are. So there is also always the debate which structures are acceptable to the banks and so on.
And thank you. There are two questions that have come in, which is linked to, I think, the long-term risk. And again, it's mainly for SEB and EIB, is how do you evaluate the, as they put it, geopolitical risk in the Baltics for a 20 to 30 year period? But also, I think, to both of you, how we look at PPPs, when you're dealing with a national or central government, it's reasonably quite straightforward. What is your view on the municipal payment risk if municipalities do it, for example? How do you take a long-term view on their creditworthiness if they are the long-term off-taker or long-term payment? So maybe to give you a rest, we'll start with EIB and then go back to SEB.
Okay, regarding geopolitical risk in the Baltics, I mean, EIB is EU institution, and Baltic countries are EU countries, right? So we consider them as EU countries. Of course, we look at the credit ratings if there is a PPP project from a payment perspective. But you can, in your mind, create all kind of scenarios of what has if the war happened. But it's, then in the long term, we are all dead, as Ken said. So it's EU countries, and it's part of our members. So we look at them as the rest of Europe.
And municipality risk?
Municipality, that I said, it depends on the project size. So, for instance, if Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius, those are like capital cities of the Baltic countries. So, of course, during financial crisis, like Vilnius had some difficulties with managing their public finances. Riga probably as well. But that all depends on what kind of project they are procuring. If for instance, Vilnius would decide to procure €1 billion project, of course, there would be a risk. And most likely we would not finance it, or we ask them to consider other possibilities of structuring. But I think if a project size is such which fits well into, you need to calculate the obligations during the years, how much they pay, how much is that considered into their total budget, how much from budget surplus or deficit. So if the figures are logical and in the norms, so it's acceptable risk from us. For us.
You don't have such an easy answer on geopolitical risk, but let's...
It's difficult to comment for me because, SEB we are a home bank in the Baltic states, and Baltic states are our... we are here for a long time, and our shareholders do not change strategy and did not change strategy during these intense geopolitical questions that have been recently. So I believe that if we are a home bank here, so we are also committing long-term funding here as well. The other question might be maybe relevant related with that some other banks have disappeared. Out of 5 Scandinavian banks, only 2 remained here. But that was I believe, not to geopolitical risk, but rather the sustainable business model and ability to make money here in the Baltic states. So as far as I know, the SEB and Swedbank, they most likely would stay for a long time here. On the municipality funding and how do we see municipality risks? All municipalities, at least in Lithuania, they are very much dependent from the central government, and the finance ministry has certain restrictions on the budgetary and borrowing limits and so on. But in any case, each municipality has its own characteristics, and we always look at if the municipality has in 10, 20 years period of time, they would be still the credit rating would be the same, and we look at some criteria like the demographics, like the budgetary discipline, like the overdue payments that the municipality has. And well, if all figures are, let's say, in green, so then most likely they would be acceptable as a counterparty for the public side.
Okay. Thank you. So a question for all the panel. In many countries, particularly Canada, or interestingly, US, and now finally the UK, after everyone's been talking about it for 15 years or so, on PPP projects or infrastructure projects in its broadest sense, particularly once completed, we're finding pension funds, insurance companies are investing directly, both equity and debt. They have long-term liabilities to pensioners. They need long-term assets, almost annuity-type income. There doesn't seem to be any of that yet in the Baltics. A, is that correct? B, is that going to change, do you think? And I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who is a member of either an insurance company or a pension fund that could answer that question as well. But maybe I'll open it up to the panel who would have views on that. So Linas first.
Yeah, I think in order to get cheaper funding, let's say like from a pension maybe funds, or in order to get a loan from the European Investment Bank, we need to have project which would be good size. It was mentioned that the rational threshold for initial investments would be more than 25 million in order to make the project attractive for the European Investment Bank and maybe for the pension funds also. But what we need to understand that our society is not big, yes, so requirements and needs are smaller. So our projects are really, how to say, small in comparison to what is happening in the UK or in the United States of America. They speak about billions, we speak about several millions. And last month I collect the data about the PPP projects, and I found only several projects which exceed, 10 million euro. So this is, one of the issues why it's quite difficult to get cheap funding, why it's difficult to get loan from the European Investment Bank, and this is why we are going usually to the commercial banks, where this is the only way actually to get funding, for this kind of investments project. And sometimes, of course, our project is so small that we don't have any loans. That means that investors come with their money, and this is the situation, this is the reality, and we need to talk, maybe something it's possible to change in the process when we ask funding from the banks, in order somehow to minimize transaction cost. We need to have this discussion in order to make this project more attractive for the more funding possibilities.
I would share
the Martins, and then I'll come back.
Actually, in our case, there is already interest from pension funds, and what we have understood from the questions from our bidders, both during open days and during questions and answers sessions, there were questions and about, for example, for how long actually the SPV and the consortium, initial consortium, has to stay. And when? After finishing of the construction, after clearance of construction risks, actually that there would be, and it would be actually normal that pension funds then are buying some shares and stepping into such a projects, because then the risk is evidently lower when construction risk is clear.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would share Lina's view as well, that the size does matter, and if the projects are lower than 10-20 million euros, so then it would not attract any pension funds or insurance companies. Even the financier or the commercial banks, we would not be willing to finance 1 or 3 million euros project, as this is too small and the transaction costs are much higher, and it is just not viable. So we also encourage that the municipalities would somehow consolidate themselves, and, for example, on the street lighting projects, on the, some kind of public schools projects, they would consolidate into one bigger project of 20, 30, maybe some other figure, and then it would be more feasible to attract financing. And of course, if the projects would be 100 and above 100 million, then it would potentially attract the international pension funds or insurance interest, and we might face that competition as well as the lenders.
Yes, maybe regarding pension funds, it would be good to receive some comments if there are some from pension funds. But what I understood from last year's discussion, that pension funds which are based in Baltics, like Latvia, Lithuania, I don't know about Estonia, they are not allowed, according to the law, to have direct investments in equity or debt. They can invest through other funds, but they are not. That was my understanding. Okay. So it limits. Of course, there are foreign big pension funds who can invest, but I think there are some legal limitations as well.
Okay. So if there are any other questions, I haven't seen any more come up on the screen. Any other questions from the audience? So we're coming down to the last 2.5 minutes. So starting from the other end this time and coming this way, just very briefly, each of your opinion from the discussion we've had and your views being based here or investing here, how optimistic are you about the development of a successful and functioning PPP market in the Baltics? We'll start from that end and come here.
Well, I'm optimistic on that aspect, and I think the good examples in Lithuania on this PPP Palanga bypass project, some other good projects is a good way moving forward. Of course, if there would be disputes and a lot of bad publicity, so then it might, of course, face tougher times. But in general, I feel more optimistic rather than pessimistic.
I think I am quite optimistic, because there is no other way how to sometimes to fund investments project. But we have to understand that PPP is not the purpose itself. It's just the alternative way, or one of the way how we could procure our infrastructure and services. And every time we need to do evaluate value for money. Is it good? Is it worth to pay maybe sometimes more for the outputs, which could be get earlier than it would be created in the traditional way? If we agree with that, if everyone in the public sector are satisfied with them, yes, we can go, I think.
5 years ago, when I was State Secretary of Ministry of Economy, I was really pessimistic about perspective of PPP, as I saw it would be complicated. Partially, it is complicated. It would be more expensive, and so on and so on. All the usual precautions. When you step into a forest, you see what animals are there, you understand what they are eating, then I have completely changed my mind, and I'm pretty sure that if we will make this first step, and first step for us is the most complicated, if we can show that PPP is an option, as it is done actually in Lithuania, I'm really optimistic, especially taking into account all these budgetary discipline figures, which actually push the public sector to seek different options.
Well, I think we are halfway there. In Estonia, we have made lots of public work concessions. If we have a need that we need to build some new infrastructure, and I'm sure we have a need for this, like the bridge to Saaremaa, which is one topic, or the Tallinn-Tartu, which is the busiest road in Estonia, which is very still life-threatening to use. If there is a need, there is a will. If the political will is there to actually invest in it, we will find a way also to make the PPP projects. And we have so many good examples from Latvia and Lithuania and Finland and from close by neighbors. So we just have to ask, how did you do it? And maybe we can do it also. So I think we do have a future in PPPs in Tallinn.
Yes, I would like to be optimistic. However, there are certain things dependent. First of all, how successful Kekava will be. Because if it's not successful, then it will be a big downstep, and we don't know what happens later in Latvian market. If it's successful and the rest of the projects comes to the market, that would really create a good pipeline. Another factor is Estonia, which traditionally was against PPPs. So if for some reason they now decide that that's the right way, and I really believe in Estonian colleagues, sorry to my Latvian and Lithuanian, but I think if Estonia starts doing PPPs, I really think they have this ability somehow internal to do things good. So so it depends on Latvia and on Estonia, and of course we always struggle with Lithuanians. It's like I started discussions exactly the same like 10 years ago, like how nice big pipeline was shown on the papers in Lithuania, how much projects we have. They never came. I mean, I'm talking about big projects, like not like 10 million euro transactions. So it's mixed feelings about the future, but I really hope that.
You've spoiled the optimism, but anyway, just starting with you. We're well into the red zone now, 3 minutes into the red zone, so I'd like to bring this discussion panel at the end. I would just like to, on behalf of everybody, please thank the panel members for their contribution. Thank you.